Think about the last time you were lying awake in bed at 2 in the morning. Your mind is racing through a loop of emails, financial pressures, or a tense conversation you had earlier that day. At the same time, maybe you've noticed a bit of extra weight gathering around your midsection that just won't budge, no matter what you do. Add to that a strange, lingering feeling of emotional exhaustion, where your motivation and even your desire for intimacy have just completely flatlined. Most people look at these things, the belly fat, the insomnia, the low sex drive, and treat them as completely separate problems. They buy a diet book for the fat, a supplement for the sleep, and maybe go to therapy for the relationship. But what if they aren't separate problems at all?
That is exactly the trap we fall into. We treat the symptoms in isolation, completely missing the fact that they all share one incredibly powerful biological root. We tend to think of stress as an emotion. We say things like, "I feel stressed," as if it's just a mood that will pass if we take a deep breath. But stress does not stay in your mind. It is a deeply physical, biological event. When you experience chronic stress, your entire nervous system changes. Your hormones shift, your metabolism rewires itself, and your body begins to adapt around one single goal: survival. It completely abandons restoration.
It's fascinating because the human stress response is actually a masterpiece of evolution, right? If you're being chased by a predator, or you're facing a physical threat, you want that instant surge of energy. You want your heart rate to spike and your senses to sharpen. But today, we aren't running from predators. We are sitting perfectly still at our desks, getting hit with notifications, endless to-do lists, social comparison on our phones, and 24-hour stimulation. We are asking our ancient biology to process a modern environment it was never designed for.
Precisely. The system was designed for acute, short-term activation. A threat appears, your body floods with cortisol, adrenaline, and norepinephrine. These hormones mobilize glucose into your bloodstream, so you have the explosive energy needed to fight or run. Once the threat is gone, the system is supposed to clear out, allowing you to return to a baseline of rest. But what happens when the threat is an overflowing inbox or a persistent financial worry? The threat never leaves, so your body is continuously pumping out these survival hormones. It's like driving a car and keeping the accelerator pressed to the floor while the transmission is in neutral. Eventually, the engine is going to burn out. That state of chronic activation is physiologically incredibly expensive.
Let's break down the physical toll of that expense, starting with one of the most visible and frustrating symptoms for so many people: abdominal fat. Why is it that when we are chronically stressed, the body specifically chooses to store fat right around the belly?
It comes down to how chronic cortisol dysregulation impacts your metabolism. When your brain perceives a constant state of emergency, it sends a signal that you are going to need a massive reserve of energy to survive whatever long-term crisis is happening. The body responds by prioritizing energy storage, specifically in the form of visceral fat. This is the deep fat that surrounds your internal organs. Visceral fat is highly responsive to stress hormones. On top of that, elevated cortisol messes with your insulin sensitivity. It alters how your body regulates glucose. So, rather than burning fuel efficiently, your body goes into hoarding mode. It's essentially stockpiling firewood for a harsh winter that never actually ends.
So when someone is beating themselves up over a lack of willpower because they can't stop eating sugar, or they can't lose that stubborn belly fat, they are actually fighting their own evolutionary biology. The body is literally demanding high-calorie, sugary foods because it thinks it needs rapid energy to survive a threat.
Exactly. Your brain is screaming for fast energy and emotional regulation at the same time. A sugary, processed snack provides a quick dopamine hit that temporarily soothes the stress, while also giving the body the cheap fuel it's demanding for this perceived crisis. It has very little to do with willpower and everything to do with hormonal signaling.
That perfectly transitions into the next casualty of this survival mode: sleep. There is this incredibly cruel irony where the more exhausted you become from the stress, the harder it is to actually sleep. People are dragging themselves through the day, completely depleted. But the second their head hits the pillow, their eyes snap open. We call it being wired but tired. What is happening in the nervous system when we feel like that?
That wired but tired state is a hallmark of autonomic nervous system dysfunction. Normally, as the sun goes down, your cortisol levels should drop and melatonin should rise. gently guiding your nervous system from a sympathetic state, which is fight or flight, into a parasympathetic state, which is rest and digest. But when you are chronically stressed, your cortisol rhythm is completely flattened or even inverted. Your nervous system literally refuses to shut down because, biologically speaking, going to sleep during a crisis is dangerous. Your body is saying, "Why are you trying to sleep? There is a tiger outside the cave." You end up in this hyper-aroused state where you are physically exhausted but physiologically on high alert.
It's like trying to fall asleep with the fire alarm blaring in your bedroom. And I imagine that if your sleep architecture is destroyed, your body can never actually repair the damage from the day, which just feeds right back into the stress loop. But there's another layer to this that people rarely talk about because it feels so personal. When we are stuck in that hyper-aroused, sleep-deprived survival state, our desire for intimacy and connection just vanishes.
It does, and it's one of the least discussed but most profound consequences of chronic stress. People often internalize this. They think there is something wrong with their relationship, or they feel broken. But from a purely biological standpoint, reproduction and intimacy are absolute luxuries. They are not priorities when the brain thinks you are fighting for your life. When the body is allocating resources for survival, it actively downregulates the production of sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen. It shifts energy away from the reproductive pathways.
Which makes total sense. If you're running from a literal fire, your brain isn't thinking about romance. It's thinking about survival. But it's not just the sex hormones, is it? It's also about how we experience pleasure and motivation in general.
That's right. Chronic stress heavily dysregulates your dopamine systems. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter responsible for motivation, reward, and pleasure. When that system is overloaded by constant stress and lack of sleep, you develop a sort of emotional numbness. You lose your drive. Things that used to excite you feel flat. You don't have the energy to engage deeply with your partner, emotionally or physically. So again, low desire is rarely just a psychological issue. It is a glaring indicator of nervous system overload.
This brings up a really important question. If our bodies are so good at compensating and hiding this overload until we finally crash, how do we know it's happening? We can't constantly draw blood to check our cortisol levels. This is where the conversation around wearable physiology, like the OXYZEN ring, becomes so vital. We aren't just counting steps anymore. We are actually looking into the nervous system.
Exactly. One of the most powerful metrics we have now is heart rate variability, or HRV. HRV measures the microscopic variations in time between your heartbeats, and it serves as a direct window into your autonomic nervous system. When you are resilient and recovering well, your HRV is higher, showing that your nervous system is flexible and can easily switch between alertness and relaxation. But when chronic stress, poor sleep, and metabolic overload start to build up, your HRV trends downward. The body reveals its overload through these patterns long before major physical symptoms fully emerge.
And that is the core philosophy behind OXYZEN. It's not about just handing you a bunch of raw data and making you feel guilty for being stressed. It's about health intelligence. It's about interpreting those physiological signals so you can understand the deep, interconnected relationship between your stress, your metabolism, your sleep, and your readiness. It's giving you the insight to say, okay, my nervous system is hyperactivated right now. I need to prioritize recovery before you hit a wall.
Because the future of health isn't about waiting until you are sick, exhausted, and carrying 30 pounds of visceral fat to finally do something, the future is about recognizing the whispers of your biology before they become screams. It's about tracking those HRV trends and realizing that maybe you don't need another high-intensity workout today. Maybe you need a walk in the sunlight, some breath work, or just a consistent bedtime. Research clearly shows that small, intentional behaviors like prioritizing sleep consistency, getting morning sunlight, and engaging in social connection can profoundly shift the nervous system back into a state of recovery.
I love that perspective. We live in a culture that constantly pushes us to do more, to hustle harder, to discipline ourselves into shape. But sometimes, when you're dealing with stubborn weight, insomnia, and a total lack of motivation, your body is not asking for more discipline. It is asking for safety. It is begging for restoration.
That is the ultimate takeaway. The human body is incredibly resilient, but it operates on a budget. If you spend all your physiological currency on managing chronic stress, you will have nothing left for metabolism, for deep sleep, or for human connection. One of the most important health skills you can develop in the modern world is learning how to signal to your own nervous system that it is safe enough to rest, recover, and rebuild.
Stress does not stay in the mind. It changes your body, it rewires your nervous system, and it alters how you connect with the people you love. But once you understand the biology behind it, you have the power to change the narrative. You can stop fighting your body and start interpreting what it actually needs.